panel session. I'm Steve Kautz, and longtime personal finance and economics teacher, and longtime involvement with Maine Jumpstart. Still helping out plan these events, and I know lots and lots of you. And what we're going to do right now is we put together a panel of folks who represent some of the most current topics of conversation, not only related to the COVID-19, but also personal finance topics that we always want to talk about and need to talk about. So the format for this is I am going to have them introduce themselves a little bit, and I'm then going to have each person answer a question that I came up with just to get things started, and then we'll open it up to questions from all of you. So please use the Q&A feature to send in your questions as the folks are speaking. And panelists, you should be able to see the questions come in Q&A. So feel free to read those yourself and answer them if they're in the moment. But if not, Mary and I will be gathering them up and making sure that we get them to you as we go along. I'm just going to say briefly everybody's name, and then again, I'm going to let you all say what you do and where you are calling from. Most of you know I'm calling from Spain, so I'm probably the farthest away, but that's Spain. And so we've been having our particular situation here, as I think you followed in the news. But it's a warm, sunny day, and at least we have that going for us, because I know in Maine it is not going to be warm and sunny. So we'll move on here and introduce folks. All right, I'm just reading my screen as we go. So we have over here Addison. And hi, Addison. And
hi.
Addison is going to be our economics person, although all of these folks will be able to comment on various areas that we're interested in, especially in terms of what you teach and your students and for your own knowledge. But in general, Addison is a really terrific resource on economics. And then we have Derek Buckspan, who is representing the real estate world.
Hi there.
And certainly an interesting thing right now, I'm sure. And Linda is going to be talking about financial institutions and what's happening with our credit unions and our banks. Certainly something that is on all of our minds probably every day. It's probably the thing I think about the most in terms of everything that's happening. And Mark Fernandez is here to represent investing and your questions about the pretty extreme ups and downs in all of our worlds right now with investing. So that's the general thing. Now I'm going to go back around in that reverse order, and just panelists, just say what you do, where you are briefly, and then after everybody's done that, I'm going to throw you each a question to get started. Mark?
Thank you. Thanks. Great to be here again. It's been, as Mary reminded me, it's been several years since I had a chance to talk to this group. So I definitely want to congratulate the teachers out there. Thank God for you folks. We definitely need you. So I've been in this business, I just added up, it's 40 years. I used to say over 30, so I'm really getting up there. So if the reflection on my bald head is messing up the screen, I apologize. I'm in Portland, Maine. I'm a principal at RM Davis, which is a wealth management advisor. So we manage almost $5 billion in assets for clients pretty much throughout the US and in some foreign countries. My experience goes way back with 40 years, you can imagine. I've been at insurance companies, I've been at a bank, I've been on a board of a credit union. So Linda, I'm a total supporter of the credit union organizations and a really strong believer in what they do. And most recently, I've been at RM Davis for about 26 years now. I headed up their research effort for 22 of those years. The last 4 or 5 years, I've been 100% client facing. So we deal with every aspect of, we call it the business of life. So we try to deal with every aspect that touches a particular individual. So it's not just investing their assets, but it's advising on Medicare, healthcare, Social Security are big ones, mortgages, 529 plans for kids, young education. So pretty much we touch everything. That's been a great place to be, and we're very fortunate to be there.
Thank you, Mark. Linda.
Hi, I'm Linda Halloran. I'm the Community Engagement Manager at Town and Country Federal Credit Union. And I've been with Town and Country for about 11 years. I've worked in the area of financial outreach, financial wellness, and community engagement for most of that time with Town and Country. And I'm in Yarmouth right now, but our location headquarters is in Scarborough, and we serve most of Southern Maine, Cumberland and York County, 40,000 plus members. So, we're very engaged in the community. My role with the credit union is to develop partnerships and work with community organizations to help make our communities a better place. Big piece of what I do is developing financial wellness programs and partnerships with schools and other organizations around a whole range of financial wellness topics. And as you can imagine, in these days of coronavirus and what's happened the last few months, we've got many of our members, employees, others in the community that we work with that are, certainly been impacted by the financial backlash. And so, get involved with providing support and programs and ways and information to help people kind of, get through this very big bump in the road. So that's what I do.
Thank you. All right, Derek.
Hi there. My name is Derek Buckspan, and I am first and foremost a real estate agent of about 17 years. I also co-own a real estate agency. It's Remax Shoreline. We have offices in Portland, Falmouth, and Portsmouth, New Hampshire, with about 80 agents.
Thank you. And Addison?
Hi, everybody. My name's Addison St. Onge-May. As Steve mentioned, I am a proud product of Maine high schools, and I participated in the Federal Reserve Cup when I was a student, actually with Steve. That's how we met. I was joking with some of the panelists before we went live here that the first time Steve and I met was in September 2008, and now we're here again talking under, unfortunately, kind of familiar circumstances. So hopefully he and I will talk under better conditions in the future. But so I'm currently employed down here in DC, where I'm talking to you now from at a political software and data firm. But I've been a longtime Fed watcher, and it's certainly been an interesting time to be watching them, even just in the last few months, never mind the last 12 years or so.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Linda, I'm going to start with you. Probably, as I said, banking and financial institutions and everything has been on my mind the most since day one of this crisis. And the question to throw your way, nice, easy one to start. The cause of this crisis is different, but the core question for us is the same. Are the financial institutions, the credit unions, banks, how are they holding up in these conditions? And can they continue to do so?
Well, I think, Bill, that's a good question. And, like many other organizations, I mean, we made a really quick pivot to go from, working in our behind the scenes people, working from our main office, to working from home remotely. Our physical locations made a shift to drive-through only. And we're not alone. I mean, financial institutions all across the country, all across Maine, whether you're a bank or credit union or online service, have all had to make changes. And so, we've beefed up our credit, our call centers. And with that, a lot of financial institutions are as well, have tried to be proactive to help members kind of deal with whatever, came that way. I mean, I read something on Facebook recently, or saw a meme that said, I think it went that, we're all in different boats, but we're all in the same storm. And so, each person, each family, each household, kind of in a different set of circumstances. Some households, people are fortunate they haven't lost their jobs, but maybe two-person households, one of the people that bring home the money has lost their job, others have cut. I mean, there's been a lot of financial turmoil, and so we as others have done things like have special loans for crisis relief loans with low rates, made payment deferments, waive fees on all sorts of different things, and being proactive to reach out to members to say, what can we do to help? And so, one of the things too that we encourage people to do, whether if being impacted by this economic situation, is to be proactive and to reach out to their financial institutions to talk to them, versus missing a payment or getting behind, or feeling stuck because you're feeling overwhelmed, to reach out and to talk to them and say, I'm up against a wall. What can I do? What can you do to help me here? So, I mean, our role in many financial institutions are, I think, being open and proactive to help people get through it best as they can, and provide resources too, other resources in the community that might be able to help, whether it's with food or utilities or other kinds of things. So I think a lot of financial institutions are pivoting in many different ways, and as we have.
Okay, thank you. Derek, throw one to you. So right now, interest rates are low, but a lot of folks are without work, and it's getting worse, a lot of uncertainty. How is all that playing in the housing market so far, and what are you seeing?
Well, interest rates are still incredibly low. We've had kind of a fundamental shift in the cold climates with our seasonality in real estate. And what's happened is, as we've all been so tied to kind of really quick information, I've seen on the buyer side of the transaction that we go through the holidays. If you have a plan to do something in real estate, then a lot of times what's happening is those plans are kind of solidifying through the holidays. And then after the first of the year, households are saying, hey, let's go ahead and look online and see if we see something that fits that need. So what we've seen is a really strong increase in buyer activity in really January, February, March, months that typically were not big home buying markets. And, the basic economics, if you're a home seller in Maine, cold climates, you're not usually thinking about putting a house on the market when it's cold out, it's dark out, it's snowy. You don't want to leave the house at 6 o'clock for showings. So we've seen this series of really active winter markets. And then at some point, the inventory picks up a little bit in the spring. Our first quarter this year was incredibly robust, and it was incredibly robust year over year because at the end of 18, we had the government shutdown. And so our first quarter of 19 was softer than typical. And so we had a really robust first quarter, and then everybody's hit pause, with COVID. Obviously, if you're planning on doing something in real estate, there's been a lot of pausing with that. What we're seeing right now is that we're seeing a lot of people cooped up and looking online and kind of ready to get on with their life, get on with their plans. So if people are still financially intact and able to do what they had set out to do, we're kind of feeling like there's a whole lot of pent-up activity, and we're kind of bracing for a lot of buyer activity with less inventory out there. Because if you're selling your house, you've still got all the concerns of having people in that tie a little bit to the first situation. So we're kind of seeing a really delayed spring market, but that's not universal. And obviously, economic hardship, job loss, those are all factors. But the phones are ringing, so to speak.
That's good. That's good. Addison, hit you with some Federal Reserve stuff. As Addison mentioned, he was a student of mine in economics, so naturally he taught me everything I know. Addison, can you comment on an action or two taken by the Federal Reserve over the last couple of months? I know there's a lot, but just pick one or two of your favorites and explain that action and its intended effect.
Sure. Well, as probably everyone is aware from just kind of following the headline news that a lot of this started moving really, really fast around mid-March. Short-term rates immediately got cut to zero. The Chairman Powell, called a surprise press conference, and generally, if you're the chairman of the Fed, surprise press conferences are things that you want to avoid. Immediately move short-term rates to zero, and later in mid-March, announced $700 billion in a new round of everyone's favorite buzzword, quantitative easing, which is really just buying longer-term debt. In the case of the $700 billion I just mentioned, that was $500 billion in government debt, $200 billion in everyone in the Fed world kind of loves acronyms. So 500 billion in treasury securities, 200 billion in ABS, that's agency-backed securities, not to be confused with asset-backed securities, right? Just to make things confusing. And the idea there is obviously to bring down longer-term rates and just using relatively traditional means, at least in the modern context of the Fed, to try and drive interest-sensitive consumption and spur investment generally. Later in March and April and early May saw a lot of really extraordinary moves that had really only been kind of discussed in Fed white papers and behind closed doors at the Fed and among academics online and stuff like that. And generally speaking, what those pretty extraordinary measures were seeking to do were expand the types of debt that the Fed is able to purchase, both under the provisions of the CARES Act that Congress passed and just within their existing mandate. So we could get into excruciating detail about some of what those different kinds of debt are. It's everything from certain kinds of municipal debt all the way to certain types of consumer loans, all the way to, for the very first time, securities backed by commercial mortgages, which is certainly its own can of worms and will probably sound familiar to folks who lived through our last financial crisis. But I'm certainly happy to talk about any of those in more detail. But among Fed watchers, it's been a interesting, concerning, but certainly interesting time. A lot of these things have never really been tried before, and their long-term macro effects, the jury is still very much out. I mean, I'd be interested to hear certainly what Linda has to say about the credit union angle. I mean, I'm here down in DC, but I know in Maine, credit unions are generally a much bigger part of the fabric up there. So the jury's still very much out, and we'll see how it all shakes out.
All right, Mark, investing. Question to get you started. Thinking about everything that's happening, but what are some of the classic rules, guidelines for investing that still apply here, no matter all of the things that are happening? What are some of the core concepts to go back to?
Well, the first one that we deal with the most at times like this is that people think they can time the market. You simply cannot time the market. You miss a couple of days, you miss a tremendous amount of the upside. I do have some charts on that if you wanted to go into it, but suffice it to say that most of our time at this point is communicating with clients and explaining to them that timing is not a good idea, and talking some off the ledge, as we call it sometimes. So they just decide they're going to get out. When you make that decision, you're going to have to make three decisions. You're making a decision to get out, you're going to make a decision to get back in, and then when to get back in. And generally speaking, it's very difficult to make three correct decisions in a row. So for people, they need to have the right asset allocation as they enter times like this. It's been very important. As a firm, we were very high in cash coming into this period. So we already had a little bit of the defense against what was ultimately happened. And we also have a longer term view. So if you do have a longer term view, you can generally exercise a little bit better judgment at times like this. So if you look back in history over rolling 5-year periods, there's never been any rolling 5-year period where the market did not come back if you did nothing. So we don't like to do nothing. So we're going to rebalance portfolios. So we're going to sell the expensive asset and buy the cheap asset. And sometimes people don't like to do that, but that's part of the discipline that you have to do. So I did get a couple thank you notes for the first time in my long, illustrious career, but people that, said, thank you for not making me sell or not talking me out of selling because the market came back so strongly. That said, we have different ideas of where the market is now, and we're continuing to reposition portfolios in what we expect to be the next wave of change that's going to happen in this country and on the world.
To everybody out there, we're going to be, opening this up to questions. So start sending your questions in on the Q&A. You can direct them at a particular panelist or just general, and we'll try to funnel them. While we're waiting for some of those to come in, panelists, you can definitely share your screen if there is something you would like to put up. I think you should see that control there at the bottom to be able to share your screen. So feel free to do that if there's something that you want to show during answering a question. While we're getting some questions coming in, Linda, I wanted to come back to you for another sort of a follow-up to what you were talking about with the financial institutions. What about the strength of the institutions in thinking about where they are now compared to the last big crisis? Very different reasons, but I did hear today in a couple of the sessions that institutions are in much better condition than they were heading into this, and the outlook is good. What's your comment on that?
Well, from what I understand and what I've heard from within our organization for sure, and across credit unions in general, it's a whole different situation. And I guess partly thank you to Dodd-Frank, because over the years since 2008, it really, regulation, a lot of people complain about it, but it's positioned financial institutions to be in a stronger place. And the amount of risky loans and things like that got us into the situation in 2008. I mean, that's not the case, and we're not in this situation now because we're in a situation for different reasons. So I think most financial institutions are secure and pretty strong right now. I think the biggest concern going forward is, we don't know how long this is going to last. I mean, most indications are that, this is not going to be a miraculous rebound, come middle of July, that, we're in for the long haul, and the economic impact and what that oftentimes could bring around are delinquencies for many people and default on their obligations and debts. So, I mean, that's a concern long-term for, I think, any financial institution, but I think also now most are, reaching out to try and work with people to try and minimize that potential problem. But I think that's one of the biggest potential concerns of, can impact a financial institution's, stability. But I think we're in a whole different kind of place now than we were back in 2008.
Thank you.
And also to piggyback on what Derek was saying before, I mean, one thing that we're seeing, which is, certainly different, we're still seeing a lot of new purchases as well, but, because of the low interest rates, refinancing of existing mortgages is keeping our mortgage team super busy these days because, the interest rates are very appealing. And so that's, there's a lot of that activity going on.
All right. Mark, a question is coming for you. Will the contraction of the economy be labeled officially as a depression at some point? Do you see that? If so, does that distinction matter?
I hope not. It certainly will be labeled a recession. It's already going to be an earnings recession, and once another quarter goes by, it'll be an economic recession. So at this point, the question really becomes, how long is it going to take this market to recover? That's dependent on basically three things: the pace of the recovery as far as corporations and companies and small businesses being able to recover profits, interest rates remaining relatively low, and having consumer demand come back. And that's the only way you get that, is by having people go back to work. We had an employment number today, so now we're at a record high unemployment. It's the highest that it's ever been since it's been recorded. And I would expect that there's going to be more stimulus going to be applied to this economy. I think Addison pretty much, telegraphed that. Through March, we had already provided about 11% of the GDP of this country as far as aid and support, either through tax abatements or other bridges that have been done. That's relatively unprecedented. So the Fed moving this fast, the government moving this fast, even though it hasn't moved fast enough in some instances, has been very, very key to the whole thing. I don't know the difference personally between what a depression actually becomes. I don't know if there's some sort of a economic indicator. Maybe Addison can help me with that, because I've never really thought about it in those terms. I tend to be more optimistic than pessimistic. But there's so many, in our opinion, we still have a little ways to go through the swamp. We're gonna slog through some more stuff here. And everybody seems to think everything is fine, but there's just a lot of friction for having everything get back to what could be considered anything normal. And so we're going to see some things survive extremely well. People are going to be taking on different habits. The consumer is going to behave differently. And I don't know that anybody knows how exactly that's going to happen. And that's one of the frustrations that we get from clients, is they want to know what's going to happen. And remember, the one thing the market hates more than anything is uncertainty. It can deal with everything else. It hates uncertainty, and that's why it behaves the way it does. And we have nothing but uncertainty right now. So there's just a lot of stuff to happen yet. And anybody that's claiming that that we're here, we're done, it's going to be this snap, knee-jerk recovery, I think is maybe taking on some other types of things that help your mind, but don't help the reality.
Yeah. Mark, there's another question in the queue that I'm going to direct to you as sort of a follow, because it's connected. And then Derek and Linda and Addison, we've got questions piling up for you as well. Mark, the question is it wise to still be considering retirement in the current situation?
So the answer is a brilliant, it depends. The bottom line on this is that the worst time to retire is when you have to sell assets that are depressed. So if all of your assets are depressed right now, you are better off trying to work a little bit longer to get to the point where the assets recover in terms of their value. Because what you're selling is an asset that's depreciated and it doesn't have the same value it had when you were planning your retirement. That being said, if you have an asset allocation that's heavily weighted to, say, a defined benefit plan where that doesn't change, that you're still going to get that benefit. If you already have a significant amount of your assets for the next 5 years that you don't have to sell depressed assets, you're still able to retire. I just talked to a client this morning, actually, who said he was planning to retire. He's actually fairly young, but he said he and his wife's plans were to travel once they retired. So he said, well, I guess I can't really travel anymore. So now he's postponing his retirement. So he has the flexibility to do that. And I think a lot of our clients are blessed that they have choices and they have options. One of the things we do with our clients is we try to put them through a very rigorous test of their financial planning in order to determine how much they can spend and when. And we do doomsday scenarios. We do Monte Carlo simulations, everything else along those lines as part of what we do for our services. And that makes a huge difference in terms of giving somebody confidence. But if you have a choice, the more conservative thing to do is to wait. And then after that, it's just another question of how well you've set yourself up in the first place and where your income is coming from. You can still count on Social Security. Medicare is going to get to be more expensive. Those are the big, do you have healthcare? That's another question. I mean, healthcare has just it's a big, big number out there for people, and you can't ignore it. So,
thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Derek, any suggestions for being a competitive home buyer in the flood of in the market post-COVID?
Do your homework. By doing your homework, have your credit union lending partner or whoever your lending partner is that you're really gone through the steps to understand the financial situation that you're in. Do your homework with understanding neighborhoods, locations, housing. The more you can do up front, the better position you're going to be. The personal letters do matter. So having a personal appeal to a seller. We see that that does impact, and you have to be able to act quickly. So I think part of the homework and legwork is getting yourself educated enough on the market so that you understand values, you understand the impacts. And I think it's a balance with get educated to the best degree that you can, but also don't act rashly. I think, first and foremost, housing is a big decision that you're going to be living with for a long time, likely. So it is a balance of getting educated. And I find that as buyers' confidence level gets higher, and, we really support a team effort. So, our lending partner, title partners, inspection partners, any of that team that you can have support the process, then you have experts in that field.
Okay. Thank you. Addison, here's a question for you. What measures do you think the Fed would take to counter deflation in the coming quarters?
Sure. Obviously a difficult question generally, and deflation is obviously a dangerous situation for participants in any economy, right? It will elevate real interest rates. It will make consumption less attractive for individual consumers, both on the personal and firm level. Mark is absolutely right. I mean, they've thrown stuff against the wall that they've never ever even really signaled very much that they would this time. So I mean, I think you're likely to see continued asset purchases like the ones that were announced in March and April. They've started really getting a lot more aggressive in the last 6 weeks with regard to the kinds of debt that they're willing to purchase. I mentioned, for example, the Fed has been criticized in the past for not getting as involved in like municipal bond markets, and they have through one of their new lending facilities that they first discussed, and I think it was April, they're now starting to purchase those. I would not be surprised if you start seeing even bigger numbers than some of the couple $100 billion figures that we've been seeing in the last month. I wouldn't be surprised if you continue to see some of the bank-specific stuff. So the Fed has relaxed certain institutional regulations around capital requirements for certain banks and in certain short-term situations. I wouldn't be surprised if you continue seeing those. At the end of the day, the Fed is constrained both by their original charter from 1913 or whatever it was, and current law. So they can do all they can to support liquidity in the country, and functionally what that means is they can engage in currency swaps with other banks, which they've been doing. They're now doing daily. That is a new tool in the past generation, engaging in currency swaps with other central banks to make sure dollars are as available as possible in foreign economies. They're now doing that daily. I mean, that would have been unheard of just a generation ago. And I wouldn't be surprised to see more extraordinary measures like that happen. I mean, at the end of the day, the Fed can dominate money markets, and they do have an influence over the real economy. But at the end of the day, there will need to. It's a free market, right? I mean, the economy will need to right itself in some form or another, and the Fed can be as accommodative as possible. And I think one of the kind of current mysteries, and maybe Mark has some comment on this, but I think as we look at equities markets, especially stocks right now, I think most of the major indices are up like 1% today, and that's even with the BLS release showing non-farm payrolls down by 20 million, right? So the Fed being accommodative is going to be really, really important going forward. And if the brains in New York and DC determine that they need to engage in purchasing even longer duration debt or new types to support everything from state and local budgets to commercial real estate markets, they will do that. And I think they've signaled their willingness now for a long time that they will do that. And that certainly has calmed a lot of folks. I can't, I don't have any inside information or anything, but I think I would definitely keep an eye out for greater volumes of debt purchases, and probably from a broader variety of sources going forward.
Steve, if I might say, the assumption in the question is that we're going to have deflation. And Addison, I think, did a phenomenal job of addressing a lot of the things that can occur there. But one of the things that I get more of a question about is inflation. So as the government continues to print money and debt is now more than 100% of GDP, which the last time this happened was around World War II. And then there was a period of low interest rates following that, but then that actually led to higher inflation. So just because we've had oil do what it did, which was really a function of some poor economic growth, but also some pretty much geopolitical action by two major governments, there is probably in the near term a greater risk of inflation than there would be deflation. So if you think you're going to have deflation, you buy financial assets. If you think you're going to have inflation, you buy things. And those are mutually opposed to each other. I mean, they're just on opposite ends of the world. So that's the degree of uncertainty that we're dealing with here. So, where are these trillions of, think what $1 trillion is. I mean, we can't even relate to it. Even $1 billion's hard enough. We're just printing that money. It's not growing out of the economy. So it has to be paid back somehow. And maybe with zero interest rates, it won't be. But there's this new theory out, which Addison probably loves to talk about, which is the modern monetary theory, which is, negative interest rates. So wrap your head around that someday. But it's really hard to communicate that to kids in middle school and high school. And I don't know if we don't really want to get into that discussion here, probably.
Speak for yourself, Mark.
Okay.
Well, we could go in a lot of directions. That's for sure. Thanks, guys. Linda, shifting to you for a minute here, more on the individual side. Should individuals with multiple loans at this time be considering consolidation? Does it depend on the kind of loan?
Well, I think it depends. It depends on a lot of things. Probably depends on the kind of loan. It depends on the amount of debt. It depends on, if that's really the right choice for the person. I mean, a lot of times, well, one of the things that everybody's probably seen and heard is that 40% of the population don't have $400 set aside for, to be able to cover an emergency. And that number, or that situation has really come roaring to reality in the midst of COVID, because, a lot of people had no cushion and, have relied on credit card debt, or for different circumstances, have car loans with higher interest rate. And, there's a lot of different circumstances. And so, consolidating debt, maybe consolidating credit cards into a lower interest one, or, rolling things together into a personal loan will free up cash flow. It's really kind of comes to what's the person trying to accomplish. So it can make sense. I mean, with credit cards, one of the things that oftentimes happens if people don't change their habits or behavior, it's going to happen again. So, that's where the financial coaching, talking, helping people better, understand their practices and behaviors and what they need to do to shift gears. And, in those conversations that we have with people, and one of the things that right now is pretty important, I'm sure teachers talk about it all the time. We heard in some of the previous presentations, the importance of talking about savings early on. It's, figuring out a way to get people to shift the mindset, shift the behaviors, to start to develop some kind of cushion, because this thing just really exacerbates how much or how important it is. And even if it's, $10 a week out of your paycheck, or if you're laid off right now and you're hunkering down on your budget and you're cutting costs, or you're spending less money on gas, it's like, are there ways you can find little incremental chunks of money that you can put into some kind of a savings account to help you ride through it, or to be prepared for the next unexpected thing? So, I mean, it's kind of, that's a little bit like a Band-Aid on a broken leg. We really need to take a look at the more holistic challenge or financial situation that people are in. And I know these are the kinds of things that the teachers that are participating in this, are trying to principles that try and instill in their students and to understand early on. And it's, you know, it's carrying the message home, and you know, a lot of the things we do, you know, we try to work with our members and people in the community to, you know, improve their financial money management practices, that they can be ready to weather these kinds of things. And sometimes debt consolidation is a piece of it, and it buys them some, you know, gives them some extra cash flow, and it buys them some time. But then it's that educational piece to go with it, that they, you know, have different habits going forward. It's a long-winded answer as to, it depends, like Mark said before.
Thank you. Mark, I think I'm going to send this one to you, but others may have a comment. What % of your Social Security check should you have income taxes withheld on for a couple earning under 100,000 when one is retired?
The answer is I don't know, and you should ask your CPA. That's the right answer. So if you're making less than 100, your marginal rate is going to be less than 22% on the federal. You got the state of Maine to deal with on it as well, and a portion of your Social Security income is going to be taxable. So it's going to be some number less than 20 something. 22% is the number right now. But other than that, it's much better to withhold the right amount so that you don't pay a penalty at the end of the year. And if one's retired, they're probably withholding more on the salaried one than on the Social Security one, because they won't be doing estimated tax payments. But it's really a question of what the mix of that income is in order to give them an accurate answer. And I would refer them to our wealth management department. Like, I'm not. But I know what you don't know.
I think this is another one I think folks may all want to comment on, but Addison, I'm going to start with you because you touched on this before. And I know this is not easy to answer probably, but it's worth digging into, especially when you guys are here. Is quantitative easing just a euphemism for more national debt?
Really, really good question, and yeah, we could spend hours on it. But the kind of short answer is not exactly in the really narrow technical sense, right? So I think to answer that, it probably helps to think about like traditionally what the Fed does versus whateve the heck QE is, quantitative easing. So obviously, traditionally, the Fed can set the federal funds rate, the rates at which financial institutions can receive infusions of cash, and that shapes credit markets generally based on those open market operations, right? Buying and selling various securities to either introduce or take money out of the economy. Quantitative easing is, yeah, this relatively new kind of buzzwordy term that really basically just describes purchasing assets beyond the traditional treasury securities that the Fed has done for decades. So in this case, what it means is it refers to buying securities that have longer durations and that are different than the shorter term traditional treasury securities. So I mentioned at the very top when Steve was kind of asking me what are some major Fed actions, there was that $700 billion round of QE, and what that was it was $500 billion in longer term treasury securities and $200 billion in agency-backed securities. So specifically, those are Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac derived debt. So basically, the reason I say the answer is no is it is not like spending tax money. This is money that is now in modern days created by people at the Fed literally opening up a computer program and changing a number on a screen, and that changes the amount of immediately loanable funds at a lot of these institutions, which is crazy to think about, but that is in effect how it works in modern times. And to get to kind of the real crux of the question is it just another term for national debt? Well, the Fed is attempting to, improve real economic conditions by making money as available as possible and making key markets as liquid as possible. I guess the best way to put it is the tax will have to be paid in some form, right? So Mark mentioned inflation could be a concern long term. we may very well pay for some of these longer term moves that the Fed is making in higher than optimal inflation down the line. And, you know, inflation introduces all these efficiencies in any economy and inconveniences for just everyday consumers. And, you know, there are many people who would argue that though it's not adding directly to the national debt, in the long term, it will increase inflation and, you know, therefore effectively add to the national debt. So on some level, it's kind of a question of semantics. On another level, that's just kind of a question that is going to vary based on who answers it. You know, I could sound off with my opinion, but, you know, as Mark said, I don't think that's super useful to you all pedagogically or probably all that interesting.
I'm going to agree with Addison, no answer. So the thing to think about is that they're actually buying assets. So the other two fun facts about the Fed are that they, through their discounting mechanism, they can only control the shorter maturities, what we call the short end of the curve. By doing quantitative easing, they're trying to shape the longer end of the curve where the longer maturities are, which is where the mortgage market would typically be. So they're trying to create some sort of incentive for people to invest long and to not have hoard cash. So that's where that program comes from. And the other fun fact is the last time they did QE, they actually made money on it. So I mean, they bought distressed assets in order to shore up the financial system. They sold them a few years later. They actually sold them at a profit. And so in a sense, they made an investment and they got a return on it. So in the strictest sense, I would say it's easier to answer that no. There are some long-term costs to that in the end, but it's been an effective way to liquefy, not liquidate, but liquefy financial institutions, so they're incented to sell, to make loans and to sell assets as well.
All right. Well, folks, as we come to our last minute or two, what I'd like to do, since we have all these educators watching you and listening to you, is in your area or even stretching outside of your area, but related to personal finance and economic education. What's one thing you think the teachers should be telling and teaching their students related to your topic? So Derek, something about the housing market or real estate that you think it's important for teachers to teach to their students, and we'll go around.
I think just the basics of how housing works in our country. You know, it's such a huge part of the fabric of the American dream. So I think a basic understanding of mortgage and the historic appreciation of real estate and how that's been a really big component of individuals' personal wealth. I think one, evolving recent change that we've seen is the increase in the standard deduction. And so understanding how historically we were so incentivized because that mortgage interest deduction was deductible. So you would see that at the end of the year. I don't think there's a very good literacy across the market with my first-time home buyers about even that in principle, or the fact that that's been a recent change where most individuals and families, unless you're at higher income, is going to be taking that standard deduction. So it really de-incentivizes a piece of that. But I think just the basics of mortgage repayment, and the fact that historically, for any longer time trend, you've seen appreciation of real estate prices.
Thank you. Linda?
I think that, the talking about addressing topics or financial issues really being built about what's going on today in the lives of people. I don't think things are going to be too different in the fall, and that, the topics, curriculum, things really being around these everyday challenges that people are facing, and encouraging, students and families to, talk about what's going on in their households about money. Kids are going to be, impacted, kids that are getting ready to go off to college or higher education. This financial bump in the road is going to impact a lot of different things affecting families and at different stages and ages. So I would say, really kind of focusing on the real life current challenges and talking, building curriculum and plans around that. I think partnering too. I mean, you know, who knows what school's going to look like back in the fall, and you know, school's going to continue to pivot virtually. We're going to, you know, financial institutions outreach is going to pivot probably more so virtually, and you know, reaching out and bringing in outside experts, you know, like people from the panel here or other financial organizations in the community to, you know, be resources and talk about what they're doing to you know, help deal with all of this, you know, makes sense to me.
Thank you. Mark, what do we tell kids these days?
Well, I think the most important thing to tell kids is they need to understand compounding. So how you make money on money, because that leads to present value. It leads to all sorts of, it's the root of everything that we do, and they need to start early. And then there's plenty of examples of those. When I spoke in 2017, I used the penny that, you know, doubled every day, so 100% compounding daily, and had people guess what this penny going to be worth at the end of the month. I said, you take $1 million today, or this compounding penny, and you can do that with kids. You can just do it simply by, you know, having them double beans. You're going to need a lot of them because you're going to get up to 5 million of them. So you end up with 5 million plus at the end of the month instead of $1 million, and it could be really, really impactful on them, depending on how you do it. And there's plenty of literature and charts on how much money you accumulate if you start earlier than later. And anybody you can even reduce it to, you know, setting aside. I mean, when I taught classes, I would have kids that would say, yeah, I save $1 a week, and I couldn't believe how much money I made. So then if Linda can jack up the interest rates at the credit unions,
Okay.
those, you know, our credit union used to have the kids come in and they would win awards for scholarships and stuff like that. They'd be given a certificate. Those kids lit up. I mean, especially went into schools like Riverton and some of the other inner city schools in Portland. And you did those kinds of things. That was something very tangible for them. And it's not this, you know, amorphous thing that's out there that nobody can relate to. And so you can bring it home to them on that sense. So as a teacher, I think that's a really powerful, powerful thing to start. And you can't start too early. I tried it with my kids, and I tried starting early. It didn't work. And now that they're actually earning income, they actually have questions. So it happens when you actually have something, you know, you can relate to it. So that would be really, really important. I would pound the table vociferously on that.
Thank you. And Addison is, you know, someone who didn't finish school too long ago. I know the Fed is this mysterious thing that whenever my students asked me, I sort of, got a little nervous to try to explain it to them. What's a message that we can tell our students about the Fed?
Sure. I mean, I think all those answers from everybody, from Mark, from Linda, from Dyer, those were all great. A hearty second to all of those. I mean, I think, you know, we God knows you can turn on the cable news at any time and learn absolutely everything there is to learn about what the Congress did that day or what the president did that day. I think the Fed, relative to how much power they wield in this country and in the world, are really, really under-discussed. And, you know, I think it's a shame that that's not different. And I think, you know, everybody here would probably like to see that change. But, you know, most people in America and most places will need to borrow money at some point. And, you know, I mean, I think understanding how interest rates are derived, what an interest rate is, the magic of compound interest, everything Mark just said is valuable from a personal finance perspective. And, you know, I don't think it's particularly important that everyone be, you know, super up on the nitty gritty of what the Fed does that week or anything. I think it's interesting and it can be valuable, but having just a basic understanding of how it works, I think makes folks more personally invested in the political process. It makes them more valuable citizens from like a voting and political engagement perspective. And in some cases, it can help you make more, you know, financially responsible personal decisions. So, you know, I think it's very, very valuable. I don't want to overstate it. You know, I think like Mark said, there is a danger of a little bit of knowledge. You know, some folks will think they know exactly what the Fed's going to do, and that can be really dangerous as well. So, you know, I think having a strong baseline understanding, you know, from just like a good government perspective is just as important as anything else.
Thank you. Well, panel, we're out of time. I just want to say thank you for carving out time out of your schedule to join us today in our virtual experiment of our online version of our conference. Hopefully, we can see you in person at next year's conference or sometime after that. And thank you on behalf of all of our teachers and Maine Jumpstart for being there today. Thanks a lot, really.
Thank you, Jumpstart.
Thanks for having me. Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
Steve. Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, thank you all very much. You guys do great and important work, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
All right, Mary, take us to the next.
I sure will.
Bottom
All
line.
right. So what we're going to do, it is now 3:12 and we went a little bit over, but I think that's okay. We're going to take about an 8-minute-ish break, just enough for you to stand up and maybe get a glass of water. Our next session is at 3:20, which is the educator panel. So we'll give you just a few minutes to kind of stretch and then come right back and we'll head into that final panel of the day. After that, we do have our raffle and closing remarks and our virtual happy hour where we're going to let everybody's cameras be turned on and just chat. And, you know, for those of you that are available for that and want to join us for that, that's great too. So take a few minutes and we'll be right back.
Hey, Mary.
Hey, Brett, how are you?
Good. All right, Sherry says she's here.
I'm just going to promote everyone.
Hi.
Hi there. Am I missing anybody? I've got Raylene, Sherry.
Caitlin.
Where is Sammy? There's Sammy. I can see. I don't see you in my.
Sammy's in the panel.
Yeah, I see I see Sammy. All right, let me grab Caitlin and Lizzie. All right.
About the other Steve from.
He just had a baby girl, so
Oh,
he's on baby girl duty.
no. My
And
kids all just showed up.
yeah,
We have a
And-
Mother's Day supper later, so I told them 4:30, guys, 4:30.
Nice.
did they show up with cocktails?
Yep, they're trying to get me to drink a rum bucket. And I'm like, not until 4:30.
All right.
But I have this really pretty plant. Check this out.
Yeah.
Pretty plant I got.
Sammy, did you get any deliveries yet? Oh,
Sammy, you're muted.
you're muted. Do I have to unmute you? Unmute you.
My husband said that I did, but I'm actually been at school all day today.
You're at school. Oh, I wish I'd thought of that. You did say that during one of our.
No, it's okay because nobody would have answered the
Course.
door. It's me here today.
Oh,
They were
good.
beautiful flowers that I got.
Good, 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 good.
Thank you.
Well,
I
my
appreciate
plan
it.
is, just for both of you to know, my plan is in the fall, assuming we're back in business, which I'm thinking we will be. I think what I'd like to do with your plaques is come to the school and do something at your schools. So we'll coordinate with your principals and maybe get your kids together and we'll do a formal presentation of your plaques once school is back in session. I was going to send them to you, but it's just kind of weird to open them in the mail. So the flowers, I think, were a great replacement for now, but I think we should do something on site at school as soon as we can. So we'll do a road trip and I'll come see you, Sammy, and
Sounds
Raylene.
good.
That'd be great.
Fall's pretty up here.
Thank you so much. It's a little bit different of a set of circumstances to congratulate you and share in the honor, but we're going to make it special once time goes on and we can get back in the classroom.
I'm excited to get back in the classroom now, all this information.
I know. It's nice to see faces. I'm really, it's been going really well, but it's nice to see some faces again.
I've been waving to everyone like at the end of it and they're like, thanks for coming. I'm like, see ya. Oh yeah.
And Steve and Brett, I like your shirts.
Oh,
I wish I
thank
would have thought of that.
I know, me too.
I think I'm gonna have to take mine to school and put it up in my classroom in the fall.
And Brett, we both have a blue Oxford too.
That's right.
And the best hair.
That's right.
Yeah, it is.
Us girls don't count because we can't go to a beautician.
I know, I got roots down to here.
Yeah, I just do it in the bathroom. I got my own clippers.
Right.
That's how the rest of my family is.
I was
I
told
gave my
it's
husband
time.
and my son a haircut for the first time.
How'd that go?
My.
Use a
Well, it was
bowl?
supposed to just be my husband, and then he went in the bathroom to check it out, and then my son like climbed up in the chair. He's 5, and he's like, "Okay." We're like, "Okay."
Oh, I'm still recording. I just realized that.
Sorry, we still